I've been using saddlebags for bikepacking since around 2016 I believe, because they work well and can be easily moved between bikes or taken off when they're not in use. But it's a new year and I thought it was time to try something slightly different on my bikepacking setup. This year I thought it would be interesting to change things up and try something new with the Aeroe Spider rear rack, to see if it can replace a seat post bag for me. After all, Aeroe do claim it's one of the most user-friendly bike racks out there. So in this video we're going to go through the unboxing, the cost, the installation process, and my first initial thoughts on the rack. Just to clarify, I bought this with my own money. There's no sponsorship or collaboration of any kind with Aeroe. They have no involvement in what I show, do, or say about this rack. The recommended retail price of this rack is £139.99. Although I didn't pay that much, and probably never would. I picked it up for around the £90 mark. To put that into perspective, if we compare that to seat post packs, the Toe Peak backloader that I've been using for the last couple of years is around £50. Seat post bags can range anywhere from £25 to £200 and beyond, but typically a good quality, well designed one will sit somewhere between the £50 and £100 mark, maybe a little bit more than £100 sometimes. If you compare the Spider rear rack to other racks on the market, you can again go very cheap from around £20 all the way up to a couple £100 or more, with some being way too expensive to justify, at least for me. When comparing it specifically as a switch from a seat post bag, the £90 mark feels like a reasonable middle ground, depending on how well it performs and how long it lasts, of course. One of the main issues with a lot of racks is getting them to be cross-compatible between bikes, and that's what I'm hoping this one can deliver on. As this rack doesn't use rack mounts as such, it clamps on to the seat stays, it is technically compatible with nearly every frame out there. I've got the single cradle version here, but you can add additional cradles with a maximum of 3 in total, meaning you could run 3 dry bags on this rack. You can buy the cradles on their own, but they are £65 directly from Aeroe, although they can be found a bit cheaper elsewhere. But let's open the box and see what the £90 actually got me. Inside the box is everything you need to get this onto your bike. The rack includes one cradle with 2 securing straps, a small pouch with a hex key, which I'm actually going to use to install this just for funsies, a couple of stickers and 4 mounting straps with small metal holes that hook onto the mounting system. The straps also have a rubberized section to help stop them slipping. You also get 2 clamp mounting bases that sit on each seat stay. These feel pretty solid, although they do seem to be made out of some kind of plastic, so it will be interesting to see how they hold up after being bashed around by rocks and general trail use. The section that contacts the frame is made from thick rubber to help reduce paint damage and stop slippage. Both the mounting bases and the straps are also replaceable, which is nice. Unfortunately though, no spare parts are included in the box, which is a bit of a letdown. It would be nice if companies included a couple of spares, especially with something like a rack where it's a good idea to carry some backups when you're out riding. Unfortunately though, these have to be bought separately for around 20 quid. The final thing in the box is the rack tubing itself. Okay, it's time to put everything together. It's a pretty simple design and I didn't need to refer to the instructions at all. The first step is attaching the mounting feet to the rack itself. There are 4 Allen key bolts on the side of the feet, and once you loosen those, you can slide the rack tubing into place. Even with the bolts fully loosened, it still takes a bit of force and twisting to get the rack through. How close you want the cradle to sit above the wheel will depend on your bike, so it's best not to fully tighten those 4 bolts just yet. Just make sure they're nice and snug so they don't move too much. The next step is fitting the cradle. The cradle can be mounted in different locations around the rack, but as I'm only using one cradle, I want it positioned directly above the wheel. The mounting system here is very similar to attaching a handlebar to a stem, if you've ever done that before. You remove the 4 bolts, take off the plate, position the cradle, and then clamp it back down, tightening the bolts evenly. The cradle can be mounted in either direction, so your bag can sit perpendicular to the wheel or, like I'm doing, in line with the wheel rather than sideways. Just as a side note, the rack tubing itself can be mounted in either direction also. How you set this up will depend on the bike you are fitting it to though. If you mount it the opposite way to how I have it here, it will sit further back, which might be useful if you're running a dropper post. It really comes down to your seat stays and bike geometry. Attaching this to the frame was fairly simple, but definitely not as quick as fitting a seat post pack. I'm installing this on my gravel bike, the Sonda Camino V3. But part of the reason for giving this rack a go is that it should work across all 3 of my bikes. That's the Bomb Track with 29 by 2.6 inch tyres, the Sonda with the 700 by 50mm tyres, which is what we're doing today, and even my road bike if I need it to. There's a bit of flex built into the tubing, which is important for making it fit different bikes. To get it onto my Sonda, I did need to squeeze it in slightly. The first thing to do is align the angle of the rack feet with the seat stays and roughly position where you want the rack to sit. Depending on the bike, it's probably a good idea to use some frame protection like helicopter tape to prevent paint damage. As this is going on a titanium bike, I'm not bothering, as one of the nice things about titanium is that marks usually just buff out. Famous last words, I know. Once you're happy with the position, it's time to actually mount the rack to the frame. The 4 straps and the Allen keys are all you need here. On either side of the rack feet are small silver metal tabs where the strap holes attach, wrapping around the seat stays. Once they're in place, you tighten the 2 bolts on top of the rack feet. This pulls the silver attachments away from the frame and tensions the straps. From here you can either tighten the 4 bolts on the side if you're happy with the height, or slide the tubing in or out slightly to bring it closer to the rear tyre or further away. Once you're happy with the height, you're all done. It's worth doing a final check to make sure all the bolts are tight and the cradle is sitting at an angle that you are happy with, and just put a bit of pressure on the rack to make sure it's all in place. When it comes to attaching bags, the cradles come with a pair of adjustable straps that you can use with pretty much any dry bag. Aeroe do sell their own dry bags designed specifically for the rack with built-in guides for the straps to help it keep everything in place. But they are pretty expensive at £55 for an 8-litre bag and 60 quid for a 12-litre bag. I already have plenty of dry bags, so I decided to keep using the one that came with my Topeak backloader saddlebag. To keep that clean, I'm using a larger restrap dry bag on the outside. I have no idea where this bag came from. That way, when I get to camp, I can just take the inner bag straight into the tent. Nice and clean. Attaching the bags is straightforward, but the straps can be a bit awkward to cinch down unless you remove the small organiser piece first. Getting that back on once everything is tightened is also a bit fiddly. I think that's partly because the dry bag I'm using is tapered, but getting it properly cinched down took more tightening than I expected. The straps do work and I'll keep using them for now, but I can see myself switching to the volley straps, however they are pronounced, in the future for a bit more peace of mind, as the bag and the straps I'm using are slightly slippery. That said, after its first outing, as long as everything was properly tightened down, the bag didn't move or come loose at all. So why did I decide to switch from a seat post bag to a rack system? It might only be temporary, or just for certain trips, but the Topeak backloader was starting to fail, it was wearing through where it rubs against the seat post, and the strap closures were becoming a bit brittle, so I decided it was time to try something new. That something new also needed to work across all of my bikes, and be easy to remove if I just wanted to ride without luggage, but also not cost the earth. Seat post sway has never really been an issue for me in around 10 years of using them, and a lot of that comes down to how much you carry. The more you load up, the less suitable a seat post bag becomes. They were originally designed for lightweight bikepacking and really for racing. But as more and more people get into bikepacking, I hear a lot about this sway, and I'm sorry to say, it's because you are just carrying too much stuff or not nice and squidgy packable stuff. If you are not a lightweight packer, then a seat post pack might not be for you. In terms of weight, the Aeroe Spider rear rack weighed 1.13 kilograms on my scales. They are just cheap luggage scales, so accuracy probably isn't too great, while Aeroe claim 979 grams, so probably somewhere around that 1 kilogram mark. For reference though, the Topeak backloader weighs just over 500 grams, so it's clearly heavier. That said, the Spider rack has a load capacity of 16 kilograms, which is way more than any seat post bag could realistically handle, especially if you want it to last and not be swaying all over the place. The heavier your load, the more likely seat post sway becomes an issue, and a rack completely removes that. While it's never been a problem for me personally, I can say that on my first ride around the North Wessex Downs, I couldn't feel or notice the rack at all, but that's not really surprising. So, while I will reserve my final judgment for a later video, when I have truly used this in all types of conditions, lived with it for some time, and given myself time to see how it holds up under different challenges on different terrain, I will just mention a few things about the Aeroe Spider rack. Firstly, one thing I will say is that, for me, on the Sonder at least, the rack does feel like it sits quite far back over the rear wheel, and a lot of that is to do with how the seat stays are positioned. My seat stays are more vertical. While actually riding it like this, I didn't really notice it, but it does feel a little further back than I would ideally like. I could probably cut the tubing down a little, so I could bring it closer to the frame, but I don't think it'd be much, and I think I will refrain from doing that until I have used it across multiple bikes. Another thing to mention is that as I'm using a dynamo light on the rear, it is powered by a cable, and being on a bigger bike as a taller rider, the cable is not going to be long enough to reach all the way to the back of the rack, and the bag does slightly get in the way of that light. I was able to move it up just under the saddle, which is still visible, but it is something to note if you are using dynamo lights. If not, mounting lights on the rack shouldn't be a problem. Now straight up, if you are looking to get this as a replacement for a seat post bag, then on its own, with one cradle as it comes, Especially if you get it on sale, I think the price is not too bad. If it lasts, of course. But I think if you were looking to start adding multiple cradles and bags, then the price of this rack would start getting into the unreasonable territory. Just add in a couple of cradles and you would soon be getting close to that £300 mark. I think if you need to carry that much stuff, I'd just be looking at a more traditional pannier setup. But after my first ride with the Aeroe Spider rack, which was only a short, very wet and muddy trip around the North Wessex Downs, my first impressions are positive. It didn't move, rattle or drop any bags. Unpacking and packing up at camp was quick and easy. The straps can be a little fiddly, especially with cold hands. But apart from that, no immediate issues spring to mind. I will of course return and give my final thoughts on the Aeroe Spider rack when I feel it's been used enough. The question for me is whether it will ultimately save me money in the long run, as seat post bags, as great as they are, they do tend to wear out after a couple of years of constant use for me. Only time and miles will tell.